She had promised herself she would not cry in public. Not in Milan. Not on the steps of a building she had worked 18 months to get into. Not in front of the pigeons, the tourists, the polished shoes clicking past her on the cobblestones like a metronome counting down the last seconds of something she could not name. But the letter was in her hands, and the words were not moving no matter how many times she read them. "We regret to inform you that your contract will not be renewed." 9 words. She had flown 4,000 kilometers for 9 words. Dagize sat on the low stone steps of the Palazzo Ferrante building in the fashion district of Milan, her portfolio case open beside her, her coat still buttoned from the morning meeting that had lasted exactly 11 minutes. Around her, the city moved the way European cities do in October. Indifferent, beautiful, cold in a way that has nothing to do with temperature. She was 34 years old. She was alone. She was out of a job. And her flight back to Lagos was in 4 days, because she had booked it with confidence, believing she would need the time to celebrate. This is the part of the story that no one tells you about ambition, not the failure itself. The failure is survivable. It is the specific architecture of the moment before you let yourself believe it, the breath you take right before the news lands, that breaks something internal and structural. Dice had taken that breath at 8:59 in the morning, standing outside the glass door of the creative director's office on the 7th floor, smoothing her blazer, believing with everything she had that today was the day her work finally spoke loud enough. Her work had not spoken loud enough, or perhaps they had not listened. She was not sure anymore which one was worse. If you have ever been the most qualified person in a room that still said no, stay with her. Stay with this moment, because what happens next will matter to you in ways you cannot predict yet. She did not hear him approach. She rarely did, even years ago, because men like Marco Ferrante moved through their own buildings the way owners do, as though the floor exists specifically to receive them. What she heard first was the pause. A deliberate 3-second pause in the rhythm of footsteps that had been heading toward the entrance. Then nothing. She looked up because the nothing was too complete. He was standing 4 meters away, one hand inside the pocket of a charcoal coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent in Abuja, his phone held loosely at his side as though he had forgotten it was there. He was looking at her the way people look at something they recognize from a dream, not certain it is real, not willing to look away in case it disappears. Marco Ferrante, 41 years old, chief executive of the Ferrante Group, which at this point controlled 3 fashion houses, a textile manufacturing arm in Como, and a creative consultancy that worked with 7 of the 12 biggest names in Italian luxury. She knew his face from the company profiles she had studied during her contract preparation. She had studied his face the way you study the face of someone you are trying to understand from a distance. The jaw, the way he seemed permanently on the edge of a decision. She did not know that he knew hers. "You were at the Salone in 2022, he said. It was not a question. Adese blinked. Around her, Milan continued its morning. A taxi honked somewhere on the Via Monte Napoleone. A woman in white walked past with an enormous garment bag draped over both arms like a surrender flag. "I was," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected it to be. He did not move closer. He did not smile in the way men sometimes smile when they are about to say something they believe is generous. He just looked at her with the particular quality of attention that she would later describe to her sister as seeing without performing seeing. "The Castellani collection," he said. She stood up slowly because sitting felt suddenly wrong, though she could not have explained the logic. She was 5'8" in flat shoes, and she had spent most of her life being told, not unkindly, not always unkindly, that she took up a lot of space. She had spent a decade deciding that this was not a problem to solve. "I was one of 4 junior consultants on the Castellani project," she said. "I don't know what you remember from—" "The print direction," he said. "The decision to pull the entire indigo range and replace it with the terracotta sequence. 2 days before presentation. You were the one who made the case." Adise said nothing. "The lead consultant took the credit," Marco continued, and his voice had the quality of a man reporting a fact he found unacceptable without performing outrage about it. "I found out 3 weeks later, by accident." She had known he would find out eventually. She had not known it would matter to him. She had assumed, because the industry had trained her to assume, that it would be filed under interesting detail and forgotten within the same quarter. The Castellani house used that collection to secure their licensing deal with Meridian Group, he said, which is now worth approximately 400 million euros annually. I know what it's worth, she said. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more the involuntary softening that happens when someone says exactly the thing you did not expect them to say, in exactly the tone you did not expect them to use. What are you doing sitting on the steps of my building? He asked. She looked down at the letter still in her hand, then back up at him. Your creative director informed me this morning that my contract won't be renewed. Apparently my aesthetic direction does not align with the house's current vision. She paused. I have been in Milan for 6 weeks developing that vision at their request. He looked at the letter, then at her face, then at the portfolio case open on the steps beside her, filled with work she had prepared across 6 weeks of 16-hour days in a shared studio apartment she had found through a Lagos Milan expat group on social media. Come inside, he said. I'm not employed by you. No, he said, but I'd like to offer you coffee and an explanation of why my creative director made a decision I was not informed about. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, because this story is only getting started, and you are going to want to be here for every turn of it. She went inside, not because he was Marco Ferrante, and not because the stone steps were cold through her coat, and not because the letter in her hand had made her feel like the city had tilted slightly on its axis. She went inside because she had spent 18 months working toward a door in this city and walking through a different door. The right door, perhaps, the one she had somehow missed, felt like the only dignified option available to her in that particular moment. The lobby of the Palazzo Ferrante was exactly what the exterior promised. Old marble, high ceilings, the kind of light that falls through arched windows and makes everyone inside look like they are being painted. The receptionist looked at Adaise with the polite blankness that expensive Italian lobbies train into their staff. No curiosity, no judgment, no expression at all. Marco Ferrante said something brief in Italian that Adaise did not catch, and the receptionist nodded and reached for the phone. They rode the elevator in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of two people who are each, privately, recalibrating something. His office was on the 9th floor and faced west, which meant that at 10 in the morning it was still in shadow, the light coming indirectly through frosted glass panels that lined one full wall. The room was large and almost aggressively undecorated, a long table, a row of fabric samples pinned to a corkboard, a desk that held 2 monitors, and a single framed photograph she did not look at long enough to interpret. No awards on the walls, no logos. No brand mythology built in bronze and mounted for visitors to understand. She sat in the chair across from the low table, where he set 2 espresso cups that had appeared as though conjured. She had not seen anyone bring them, though she understood that offices like this operated on invisible systems of service that the important people inside them rarely noticed. She noticed. Tell me what they told you, he said. I've told you what they told me. Tell me what they told you before that. Over 6 weeks. She looked at him. Why? Because I want to understand what happened in my own building. And if I tell you, what do you do with it? He picked up his espresso, set it down without drinking. That depends on what you tell me. She studied him for a moment, the way she studied fabric, looking for the weave underneath the surface texture, trying to understand what would hold under pressure and what would pull apart. Then she told him. She told him about the first meeting 3 weeks into her contract when the creative director, a pale, thin man named Gianluigi, who wore his scarcity of warmth like a design choice, had presented her initial concept boards to the internal team without her in the room. She told him about the second meeting, where she had been asked to simplify the references in her textile direction, which she had understood to mean make it less you. She told him about the third week, when a junior member of the design team had begun presenting her ideas in morning meetings as though they were collaborative developments that had emerged organically, and no one in the room had corrected this because no one in the room had an incentive to. She did not cry, she had promised herself. But her hands, she noticed, were very still in her lap, the stillness of someone who has learned to keep everything important below the surface, where it cannot be used against her. Marco listened without interrupting. This, she would also tell her sister later, was rarer than it should have been. Not the listening, men in power listened sometimes, but the quality of it. He listened as though the information mattered, independent of what he would do with it, as though her account of events was worth the full weight of his attention simply because it had happened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Gianluigi has been with the house for 11 years, he said. "I know. He is also," Marco said, "responsible for 3 consecutive collections that have underperformed commercially by a margin I have been reviewing for 4 months." She had not known that. "I brought your name to the contract team in August," he said, "because of what I learned about the Castellani project. I asked that you be considered for a senior consultancy role." Adese was very still. "I was told the engagement had been structured as junior, short-term as a trial." He picked up his espresso again. "I was not told that the trial parameters had been designed to ensure you would not pass them." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. She understood it then, the architecture of what had been done to her. Not a failure of talent, not a mismatch of vision. A structure built specifically to receive her and produce a particular outcome, regardless of what she brought into it. The letter in her bag said, "We regret to inform you." What it should have said was, "We were afraid of what you would become if we gave you the actual ground to stand on." "I want to show you something," Marco said, and stood. He led her to the corkboard on the far wall, the one she had noticed but not examined. He unpinned 2 large sheets and laid them on the table. They were print direction boards. She recognized the language of them immediately. The color sequencing, the material references, the handwritten notes in the margins annotating texture relationships. She looked at them for a long time. "These are mine," she said. "Gianluigi submitted them as the basis for next season's direction last week," Marco said, "with certain adjustments to the notation. Your name does not appear anywhere on the documentation." Something cold moved through her chest, then something else, something older and harder and more difficult to name, the specific anger of a woman who has watched her work walk into rooms without her body attached to it, over and over, across a career that was supposed to be hers. "What do you want from me?" she said. Her voice was very level. "I want to offer you the role I originally intended to offer you," he said. "Senior Creative Director, Textile and Print, full contract, 18 months renewable, based here in Milan." "And Gianluigi?" "Gianluigi's contract will not be renewed," Marco said. And there was something in the way he said it, not with satisfaction, not with theatre, that told her he had made this decision before she walked into his office, possibly before he saw her on the steps. She looked at the boards on the table, her work, her eye, her months. "No," she said. He looked at her. "Not yet," she clarified. "Not like this." "Explain." She sat down again. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to be deliberate. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the full weight of a woman who had spent 6 weeks in a city that had tried very hard to make her feel like she was too much and not enough simultaneously. "If I take this role because you feel guilty, or because you want to correct an internal problem, or because offering it to me makes the Gianluigi situation cleaner, I become a solution to your problem, not a creative director of mine." She paused. "I am not interested in being anyone's solution." Marco Ferrante looked at her for a long moment. The city hummed somewhere behind the frosted glass. "What are you interested in?" he said. "Being chosen," she said, "specifically for what I actually do." "I know what you do," he said. "I have known since the Salone in 2022. "Then show me the brief," she said. "The real one. The season you are actually worried about. Not the one that's been cleaned up for presentation. Give me the actual problem in 4 days, because that is how long I have before my flight, and let me show you what I would do with it. Then decide." He was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than most silences she had sat inside. "The spring collection direction is due to the production team in 5 weeks, he said. "The current approach is not working. I have known this for 6 weeks, and I have not had the internal courage to say it openly, because Gianluigi has been here for 11 years, and I was trying to find a way to manage it that did not require me to start over. "Give me the brief," she said. "If there is a moment you should comment on this video, it is now, because what Adais did next is the reason this story exists, not the offer, not the injustice. What she did with 4 days in a city that had already tried to send her home." He gave her the brief. She worked in the studio he arranged for her on the 6th floor, a room with a north-facing window and a long white table and a materials archive that ran along one full wall in labelled drawers. She worked the way she always worked when something mattered, in silence, in sequence, building the logic before she built the image, finding the through line that made every decision feel inevitable rather than decorative. The brief was for a spring collection from the Ferrante House's ready-to-wear arm, a line that had historically positioned itself between accessible luxury and genuine craft, and had spent the past 2 seasons drifting away from both toward a kind of generic aspirational tone that said nothing and cost a great deal. The production team was anxious, the buyers were asking questions, the editorial press had begun using the word safe in ways that were not complimentary. Adais read the brief 3 times. Then she set it down and looked at the materials archive for a long time without opening a single drawer. She was thinking about weight. Not the weight of fabric, the weight of what the brand had been trying to say without saying it, and why it kept coming out wrong. A collection is a statement about what a body deserves to be dressed in, and somewhere in the past 2 seasons, this brand had forgotten what body it was talking to. She opened the drawers. She spent the first day with swatches, the second day building color relationships. She did not produce boards on the second day. She produced questions, written on the long white paper she found in a drawer beneath the table, questions about proportion and silhouette, and the specific way fabric catches afternoon light in the Mediterranean versus Northern European light, because these are not the same light and they do not make the same promises. On the third day, she built the boards. They were not like anything Gianluigi had submitted. They were not gentle or palatable or designed to be easy to approve. They were specific, and they were grounded, and they argued, quietly, the way the best design arguments work, for a body that moved through the world with presence rather than permission. She was thinking, though she would not have said this aloud, about the steps of this building, about sitting on them in a coat that was still buttoned from a meeting that lasted 11 minutes, about what it means to be a woman who takes up space in a city that keeps building the space slightly too small. She brought the boards to Marco on the morning of the 4th day. He looked at them for a long time. She sat across the table and let him look. She did not explain. She had learned, across a decade of presenting work, that explanation before someone has finished looking is an apology for the work. Her work did not need her apology. "The terracotta sequence," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not the tone of a man evaluating a business proposal. "The indigo range didn't belong to that collection either," she said. "I've been thinking about light for a long time." He looked up from the boards. "This is what the spring collection should be." "I know," she said. "Will you stay?" She looked at him. "I told you, not because I'm a solution." "You're not," he said. "You're the direction." He paused. "There's a difference. I need you to believe I understand the difference." "Why?" she said. "Because if you don't believe it, you'll spend the next 18 months building walls around your work to protect it from this building," he said. "And then you'll leave. And you'll be right to leave. And I will have wasted both our time." Adais looked at the boards on the table between them. Her work, her eye, her 4 days. She thought about the letter in her bag, the one that said, "We regret to inform you," and she thought about the 8 other women she knew across her industry who had received variations of that letter in that tone, with those 9 words, after pouring themselves into rooms that had been designed to return them empty. She thought about the salon in 2022, when she had been a junior consultant in a room full of people who held the decisions, and she had made the call to pull the indigo range and replace it with the terracotta sequence 2 days before presentation, because she had understood something about light and something about bodies and something about what the clothes were trying to say that no one else in the room had been able to articulate. She had not been thanked for it. She had not even been credited for it. She had filed it under things that happened and moved to the next project. He had filed it under something different. "I need something from you first," she said. "Name it." "I want the documentation corrected, on every internal file where my work appears under another name. I want my name on what I made, not for the press, not publicly, internally." She held his gaze. "I need this building to know what it has been holding." "Done," he said, without hesitation. "And I want the contract to reflect creative authority, not advisory, not consultancy. If I am the creative director of textile and print, I am the creative director. That word means something specific." "Yes," he said, "and I want to choose my team. Within the structure, Marco." She said his name the way you say the name of someone you are deciding whether to trust, fully and at once. "If I am choosing the team within the structure, I am not choosing the team." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Yes, you choose the team." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, Milan was doing what Milan does in late October, pulling its light back earlier each day, saving it, making the afternoons brief and the evenings long and slightly melancholy in the way of beautiful things that know winter is coming. She had flown 4,000 kilometers for 9 words that were supposed to send her home. She had sat on the stone steps of this building in her buttoned coat and let herself almost break, and a man she had not thought about in 2 years had stopped walking. And now she was here, on the 9th floor, with her work on the table between them, and a decision that was entirely hers. "I'll stay," she said. "Good," said Marco Ferrante. She picked up her coffee. It was cold by now, she had not touched it in an hour, and she drank it anyway. A person who has made a real decision does not require the coffee to be warm. What followed was not easy. She would say this clearly to anyone who asked, and she would say it without drama. The building had muscle memory. 11 years of Gianluigi meant 11 years of a certain way of operating, of decisions being made in particular rooms by particular people, of the floor understanding instinctively, whose footsteps carried authority. When Adiz walked those floors, there were days when the resistance was overt, a meeting scheduled without her, a material decision pushed through before she was consulted, a junior designer who looked at her presentations with the polite blankness that means, "I do not believe you will last." And there were days when the resistance was quieter, and therefore harder. The slight delay in responses, the enthusiasm that appeared only when Marco was in the room, the way certain conversations stopped when she entered. She documented everything, not from fear but from precision. She had learned the Castellani collection, the 6 weeks of this contract, the decade before that documentation was not paranoia. It was architecture. It was building the proof of your existence in rooms that would prefer to remember you as a passing weather event. She also built her team. She brought in a textile specialist from Dakar named Amara, who understood weight the way Adiz understood light, and whose work with woven structures had never reached European markets, because the European market had a very specific idea of where good textile work came from. She brought in a print technician from Lisbon, who had spent 8 years working for a company that barely paid him and would not promote him because he was 26 and looked 22 and had the kind of confidence that makes insecure people aggressive. She brought in a colorist from Milan itself, a woman who had been working freelance for 12 years because no house had offered her a full contract, and who cried briefly and privately when Adayez called her, and who then produced work of such sustained quality that even the most skeptical members of the design floor stopped in front of the color boards and said nothing for a long moment. They built the spring collection together, not in the way collections are sometimes built, by committee, by compromise, by the slow negotiation of everyone's discomfort, but in the way that real work is built, by people who understand why they are there and what the work is trying to say. Marco stayed out of the creative process in a way that she recognized after the first 2 weeks as deliberate. He appeared at presentations. He asked questions, good ones, the kind that sharpened rather than redirected. He did not second-guess. He did not manage her to other people. When the production team pushed back on the timeline, as production teams always do, as production teams are right to do because timelines matter, He did not bring that pressure to her in a way that suggested she should absorb it into the work itself. He absorbed it himself externally and reported back with the parameters adjusted. She noticed this. She filed it, not under things that happened, but somewhere closer to the center. The spring collection went to buyers in February. The response was unlike anything the Ferrante ready-to-wear arm had generated in 4 years, not because the collection was louder. It was, if anything, quieter than recent seasons, but because it was sure of itself in a way that expensive things are supposed to be sure of themselves, and so rarely are. The press used the word grounded. One buyer, a woman from a department group in Copenhagen, who had been purchasing Italian ready-to-wear for 22 years, told the sales team it was the first collection in recent memory that understood who was wearing it. Adais read that note and did not celebrate immediately. She printed it, she added it to the folder. What shifted between her and Marco happened slowly, the way things shift between two people who are both, for different reasons, careful with themselves. It was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of small ones, the conversation that ran an hour past the point where either of them had a reason to keep talking, the evening he brought her coffee from the place 3 streets over, because she mentioned once, in passing, that the building's machine produced something that tasted like an apology for coffee. The afternoon she came to his office to show him something in the materials and found him reading a book in Portuguese that she happened to have read. And they spent 30 minutes not discussing the materials at all. She did not rush toward it. She was not built for rushing toward things that mattered. He was patient in a way that surprised her. She had expected, given everything she knew about men who held the decisions, that he would be comfortable with the ambiguity up to the point where it was comfortable for him, and then he would name it the way men in power name things, as a statement rather than a question. He did not do that. He waited. He kept waiting. Long enough that she eventually asked herself, sitting in the north-facing studio at 7 in the evening, with the city darkening outside, whether the waiting was its own statement. She went to his office. She knocked, even though the door was open. He looked up from the monitors. "You've been patient," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He set his pen down. "Because you taught yourself not to trust quickly, and you were right to teach yourself that, and I don't want you to override a lesson you learned for good reasons, because I am impatient." She looked at him for a moment. "That's a very precise answer," she said. "I've been thinking about it for a while," he said. She came inside. She sat in the chair across from his desk. Not the meeting chair this time, but the smaller one beside the window, the one that was not positioned for business. And they talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with collections or contracts or the spring season. They talked about Lagos and about Como, and about what it costs a person to build something in a language that is not native to them, not a spoken language, but the language of an industry, the particular dialect of rooms that hold the decisions. They talked about what they had both gotten wrong about ambition, about what they had gotten right. At the end of the conversation, he said, "I would like to have dinner with you, not as your employer." She thought about the steps, the letter, the 9 words, the 4 days, the boards on the table, and the decision that had been entirely hers. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. She stood to go. At the door, she paused. "The photograph on your desk," she said. "The one I didn't look at the first day." He was quiet. "Your mother?" she said. "Yes," he said. "She built the first version of this house. Before my father, before the expansion, before any of it. She spent 12 years building it in a city that was not interested in the kind of fashion she was interested in." He paused. "She told me once that the building only starts to belong to you when you stop asking its permission to exist inside it." Arassisi stood in the doorway of his office, on the 9th floor of the Palazzo Ferrante, in the city that had tried to send her home with 9 words in a letter. "That's what the collection is about," she said. "I know," he said. "I knew when I saw the boards." She left his office and walked back through the building, through the corridor with the marble floor and the arched windows, and the light that fell in a way that made everything look like it was being preserved. She walked the way she had learned to walk through this building over 4 months, which was the same way she had learned to walk through every building that had not been designed for her, with full presence, with the particular posture of a woman who has decided that the space she takes up is not a problem to solve. The spring collection was nominated for 3 industry awards. Daisy attended the ceremony in a terracotta dress that she had made with Amara, not for the press, not for the cameras, not as a statement anyone else needed to read. For herself. Because she had been thinking about light for a long time, and she finally had a building with a north-facing window and a materials archive and a team that understood what she was trying to say. She did not win all 3 awards. She won 1. She put the certificate in the folder, next to the Copenhagen buyer's note, next to the original contract documentation with her name on it, next to the print direction boards from the Ferrante collection, properly attributed at last. She did not put the letter there, the one with the 9 words. She had left that on the stone steps of this building the morning she walked inside, and she had not gone back for it. Some things are exactly as heavy as they need to be for exactly as long as they need to be, and after that, they belong to the city. Milan kept them. It keeps everything, in the end. The shoes on the cobblestones, the taxi horn, the October light pulling back a little earlier each day. It kept her beginning, the one that looked like an ending, the one that turned out to be neither. What it could not keep was her. She was still there, still building, still the only conclusion this particular story was ever going to reach. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are still here, from the steps to this last moment, you already know why it matters.